Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Joshua chapter 6 and Romans 11. In Joshua 6, we hear the account of the fall of Jericho. Now, I'm certain every single one of you will remember that from your children's church days. And so I'm not going to go through this line by line. Instead, I'm going to suggest you try and apply it to your own life. You say, well, God, how do I apply a text to my life? Well, one of the ways you do it is you ask questions. You ask questions as you probe the text. So let me ask some devotional type questions for you. What is your Jericho? In other words, what is the thing that God has promised you that you haven't yet walked into? What is it that's tightly shut up like that? And what has God said about that for you? Thirdly, what role does praise and thanksgiving have as you walk toward your inheritance? And what about the little things that God has asked you to do? Have you obeyed the little things that He's told you to do? What about the role of His presence? The Ark of the Covenant walked out in front of them as they took this. What about you and the presence of the Lord? What about that? And then Rahab. Rahab speaks to someone that's being shown mercy while you're getting your inheritance. Who have you been asked to show mercy to show generosity to? And what has the Lord told you not to touch? What in this new ambit, this new dream that you have, are you to stay away from? And what is it that belongs to the Lord? These guys took stuff into the treasury house of the Lord. What is it that God's asked of you? Anyway, you can go through that, and I trust that you get some real value from it. But now I'm going to go to Romans chapter 11, because that's the anchor text for today. Now, remember, Paul was very anxious about his fellow Israelites being saved. That was Romans 9 and 10. And then he asks the question straight out at the beginning of Romans 11. And he says this basically, will Israel be saved? Has God abandoned them? Has God abandoned them? And then the most emphatic no that you can get in the original language, absolutely not. God has not abandoned them. And the example that he gives is one of a tree. He says, Israel is like this tree. I'm sitting in a garden here, and Israel's the root of this tree. And what's happened, he says, is that, because of unbelief, some of their branches have been broken off, and we've been grafted into this tree. That's the metaphor that he uses, which is a beautiful metaphor. Some people have this dualistic idea that the Old Testament was for the Jews and the New Testament for the Gentiles. God's finished with the Jews. Now, this text makes it very clear He's not. The Bible is one whole plan of God. We come out, the roots of our faith are the Jewish experience. And so you've been grafted in to this tree which has Jewish roots. And so here's some surprising things that we're going to learn out of this text. Firstly, one, God is not finished with the Jews. Second, He's always kept a remnant. You've said that a lot of people in Israel are not saved today. They're not going to heaven. I agree. But he says in this verse, he says there's a remnant. And the example he gives, he says, remember Elijah. Elijah said, I'm the only one left who's following you. God said, no. I've actually saved 7,000. 7,000. I don't know how Elijah missed 7,000 people, but he did. So there's always been in the root a faithful remnant. But the rest of them have hardened hearts. What's that come from? From disobedience, walking away from God, choosing to obey law rather than Jesus. And then eventually God says, okay, I'm just going to let your hearts be hardened. And that's what's been described here. But then it's clear to us here that they're not beyond recovery. And in fact, there will be a massive ingathering of Jews. It's right at the very end of this particular text. In fact, it says all Israel will be saved. Now, that doesn't mean every single Jewish person is going to heaven. It doesn't mean that. It means a significant number. There's all Israel came before the king. All Israel is used in many instances, which doesn't mean every single person. It means a huge representation that makes it very significant are going to be saved. But basically, this text says that the reason we got the gospel so quickly is that they rejected God. It's not that God wouldn't have got the gospel to us, but it just got to us quickly because they rejected it. And then we are going to be instrumental in many of Jews coming back to faith. And God's really been stirring me as I've been reading this text that we need to go and plant churches in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv and in Israel. They're very hard to lead to Christ because they've hardened their heart. But this is how they're going to get saved. This is what this verse says. We're going to provoke them to jealousy, not envy. Envy is when you're longing for someone else's stuff and you shouldn't have it. It's not even yours. But jealousy is when someone wants to take your thing and you jealously grab hold of it. So in other words, when we say to the Jews, you know your Messiah that we serve? You know your Bible that we have? You know your law that underpins our faith? You know your father Abraham, who's my father now in the faith? That provokes to jealousy. That seems what this verse is saying. And then there will be engrafting again of the Jews that have abandoned Jesus. So this is a great chapter, and I trust as you read it, you pray together with me, together with Christians all over the world, that millions of Jews come to faith in Jesus as the Gentiles have been.